The journey of the Gauls doesn't begin with their dramatic encounters with Rome. Instead, it finds its roots in the shadowy forests and rugged valleys of Central Europe, long before they became notorious warriors. It was around 1200 BCE, deep in the late Bronze Age, that a wave of cultural change started sweeping through these lands. This pivotal moment would sow the seeds for one of the most significant civilizations the continent would ever see. At that time, the ancestors of the Celts, known today as the Proto-Celtic peoples, lived in areas we now recognize as Austria, southern Germany, and eastern France. Their world was transforming, setting off centuries of demographic and cultural shifts that would echo throughout Europe. This era is best illuminated by the Hallstatt period, named for a lakeside village in Austria, where archaeologists found the first traces of this unique culture. The Hallstatt phase, which began around 800 BCE, marked a turning point as the region transitioned from old Bronze Age traditions to a new era, the Iron Age. What set this period apart was how these communities learned to harness new metals, organize themselves into more complex societies, and establish far-reaching trade networks. All these elements would become signature features of Celtic life. Excavations at the actual site of Hallstatt have uncovered astonishing remnants of this era's prosperity. The salt mines that fueled the local economy worked their own kind of magic, preserving organic items that would typically rot away. Because of this, historians today can peer into a window of daily life rarely offered by ancient sites. Everything from leather clothing and wooden implements to the remains of the people themselves has survived thanks to the salt. This rare preservation shows a people equally skilled in practical crafts and remarkable artistry. Perhaps nowhere is the complexity of their society clearer than in the Hallstatt cemetery, where more than 2,000 graves tell a story of both simple and lavish lives. Some were interred with basic clay vessels, while others lay surrounded by ornate bronze and iron weaponry, each piece decorated with striking geometric designs. Shifting from bronze to iron wasn't just a matter of swapping materials. Unlike the scarce components used for bronze, iron was abundant, putting sturdy tools and weaponry into more hands than ever before. This accessibility fueled population growth and expansion, letting communities clear more fields with tough iron plows and arm greater numbers of defenders. Smiths from Hallstatt didn't just produce practical tools, they elevated weapons into art. Their iron swords, with hilts shaped like human figures, symbolized both martial skill and technical mastery. Yet the people of this era weren't a single unified civilization. Instead, they existed as interconnected tribes, tied together by common languages, shared beliefs, and a recognizable culture. Evidence from ancient linguistics suggests that even then, the Celtic tongue was splitting into several branches, laying the foundation for the later division into Gaulish, Brittonic, and Gaelic languages, as groups drifted apart across Europe. As their language evolved, so did their reach. Trade routes during the Hallstatt Age linked them far beyond their homeland. Mediterranean artifacts like Greek ceramics and Etruscan metalwork have been found buried with Celtic nobles, proof of long-distance exchanges with the sophisticated cities of the south. One astonishing example is the Vix burial in Burgundy, dating back to around 500 BCE. There, archaeologists discovered a huge Greek bronze vessel among the grave goods, a stunning example of Celtic prestige and global ties. But the Celts weren't just passive receivers. They adapted southern ideas and techniques, merging them with their own traditions to create new and uniquely Celtic art styles that influenced Europe for ages. The reach of Celtic culture expanded westward through a blend of migration, contact, and conquest. Around 700 BCE, Celtic speakers started moving into what's now France, laying the groundwork for what would become Gallic society. This didn't happen overnight. Tula from Mace. Rather, families and clans gradually spread out, searching for new farmlands and trading partners. With them they brought not only their tools and crafts, but also their customs, beliefs, and social ways, slowly weaving their identity across Western Europe. A significant leap forward came with the emergence of the Latin culture around 450 BCE, named after a lakeside site in Switzerland, where a new phase of Celtic mastery was uncovered. Ten marked the blossoming of distinctive Celtic art and technology. Their designs, which flowed with twisting curves, animal figures, and intricate knots, borrowed from earlier Hallstatt patterns, but reached new artistic heights. Metalworkers of the Latin culture pushed the limits of what their Hallstatt ancestors had done, creating bronze masterpieces with raised patterns and iron weapons that were both formidable and elegantly crafted. The famous Battersea shield, though from a later period, captures this dazzling artistry, its bronze surface alive with spirals and faces catching the light as you move around it. Not only metalwork, but also everyday objects like pottery saw a revolution, where early Hallstatt ceramics had stuck to basic shapes with simple decorations. Latin potters invented new techniques, throwing their vessels on wheels and painting them with dynamic designs, often echoing the motifs seen in metal. Archaeological finds from places like Manching in Bavaria show that certain workshops specialized, each developing its signature forms and styles. The shape of Celtic society itself was constantly changing. In the Hallstatt years, people moved from small farms scattered across the landscape toward larger, fortified centers high on hills. These strongholds, built on elevated ground for defense, became the main hubs for commerce, crafts, and local power. One impressive example is the Hüneberg in southwest Germany, with its towering mud brick walls inspired by Mediterranean methods. Inside, entire communities lived, worked, and traded under the protection of elite families. On the land, Gallic farming was impressively advanced for its time. The widespread use of iron ploughs made it possible to break up heavy earth more efficiently, and evidence shows they practiced crop rotation and kept large herds of livestock. Their ability to stockpile food and surplus crops made society more stable, freeing some people to become specialized workers or professional warriors, a class that would one day gain fame across Europe. Social order among the Gauls was distinctly layered. The top tier included powerful warriors who controlled territory, animals, and trading ties. These chiefs were often buried with lavish displays of wealth, glistening jewelry, ornate weapons, and imported treasures. Beneath them were the farmers, artisans, and merchants who formed the essential backbone of Celtic life. At the base of society were individuals who had little to no freedom. Many of them were captives from war or people trapped by debts. These men and women worked the fields and served the households of those above them. The spiritual life of the first Gauls, meanwhile, was deeply tied to the world around them. Sacred sites weren't built in stone or wood, but found in the landscape itself, hidden springs bubbling from the earth, quiet groves of old trees, and high places where the sky felt near. It was in these places that people believed the human and divine worlds touched. To honor the gods, the Gauls left behind precious objects, swords, jewelry, and other valuables, casting them into rivers and lakes. Centuries later, these underwater hoards would reveal to archaeologists the depth and variety of Celtic spiritual life. The famous Gundestrup cauldron, created during the later Latine period, amazes us with intricate images of deities, ceremonies, and mystical animals, hinting at complex beliefs and rituals. The origins of the Druids, the priestly class that later captured the fascination of Roman writers, likely trace back to these early societies. Specialists in ritual, lore, and the careful passing down of stories, they shaped the religious heart of Celtic life. Although direct evidence of Druidic customs from the Hallstatt period is scarce, the rich symbolism found in high-ranking graves suggests that a class of powerful priests was already emerging, charged with safeguarding traditions and presiding over sacred rites. Warfare was more than a grim necessity. It was woven into everyday life and identity. The spirit of the warrior, which would define later Gallic culture, was already strong in these ancient times. Hallstatt burials often feature men set to rest with their weapons, spears, swords, and shields, clear marks of their status as fighters. These tools weren't just for ceremony. Skeletons from these graves show scars and injuries, proof that combat and raiding were constant dangers. The Gauls invented military equipment that shaped the way wars would be fought for generations. Their long iron swords, perfect for wide, slashing swings, called for new training and tactics. Their shields, usually oval or rectangular and reinforced with leather and metal, balanced protection and mobility, letting warriors fight up close and press their attacks. Among their most memorable inventions was the carnix, a battle horn shaped like a boar's head. Its eerie sound could cut through the noise of conflict, uniting fighters and intimidating their enemies. By 500 BCE, Celtic communities across the region now known as Gaul had built a society of remarkable complexity, one that would endure for centuries right up until Roman power swept over the land. This mature Gallic world was the end result of hundreds of years of change, innovation, and social evolution that had begun back in Hallstatt times. The tribal cultures that took shape across what is now France, Belgium, parts of Germany, Switzerland, and northern Italy were striking in their organization and achievements. Their society was shaped by a clear social order, divided into three main groups, the very classes that Julius Caesar would later describe in his famous writings, although his outsider's view sometimes missed the deeper realities. At the top stood the Druids, a class apart thanks to their mastery of spiritual knowledge, legal matters and education. While the warrior chiefs held sway with force and land, the Druids wielded influence through wisdom. They were living archives, memorizing immense stores of lore, history, legend, and even astronomy, training that sometimes lasted decades. Aspiring Druids made long journeys to distant schools, secluded on islands or deep in ancient woods, places dedicated to study and ritual. Their education covered much more than myth and sacrament. Practical training in medicine, law, and observing the heavens gave them a vital role as healers, judges, advisors, and keepers of memory. Through shared learning, the Druids linked together tribes that might otherwise have been strangers, meeting annually at major sacred groves to settle disputes, agree on spiritual matters, and strengthen the sense of a wider Celtic kinship. Below the Druids, but often just as influential in everyday affairs, were the Diequits, the warrior nobles who dominated both politics and warfare. These men commanded large estates, controlled armies of loyal retainers, and constantly vied with rivals for supremacy. Their status came not just from land or birth, but from the respect earned on the battlefield. The lives of the Equites revolved around the ideals of courage, loyalty, and earning fame through bold exploits. Young nobles proved themselves by seeking out danger, leading raids, dueling with foes, and showing their worth to win prestige and the chance to rule. Loyalty between noblemen and their warriors was set in elaborate oath ceremonies binding service and protection to a code of honor. A noble's follower could expect shelter, help before the law, and a share in any spoils so long as he remained loyal, even if it meant dying by his leader's side. These tight bonds forged powerful fighting groups, bound closer by personal allegiance than by mere tribal connection. Material culture reflected these distinctions. The weapons and armor of the elite were masterpieces, as well as tools, decorated with gold, silver, and intricate designs that spoke of their owners' victories and lineage. Take the legendary Agris helmet found in western France, its bronze shell gilded with gold, studded with coral, and carved with faces and patterns. These objects weren't just for show, they were living proof of status and identity. The vast majority, however, were the plebs, the commoners who made up most of Gallic society. These were small-holding farmers, skilled artisans, traders and merchants who kept the wheels turning in villages and markets. While they didn't have the same say in politics or warfare as nobles and priests, they weren't powerless. They could join in tribal councils, defend their land with arms, and even build prosperity through hard work. The daily life of the plebs was all about survival and improvement. Using iron ploughs, they managed to tame heavy soils and grow a diverse range of crops: wheat, barley, oats, and beans. By rotating crops and carefully breeding their livestock, they kept harvests strong and soils healthy year after year. These practical skills, along with sophisticated layouts for their fields, laid the foundation for continued population growth and economic stability. Craftsmen, meanwhile, earned renown for their artistry and skill. Whether it was forging tools and swords, shaping elegant pottery, or weaving colorful textiles, they contributed both to everyday life and to the unique style known as Latine art. Blacksmiths produced items that were both useful and beautiful: fibulae, torques, belt clasps, and worked together in specialist workshops, often inside the fortified oppida that doubled as trading and manufacturing centers. There they could tap into trade networks, exchange ideas, and serve customers from many tribes. Belief in the divine was never far from daily life. The Gauls honoured a rich pantheon of deities, each connected with aspects of nature, the tribe, or a particular skill. The god Lug, linked to light, talent, and warfare, was revered widely and under many names. Epona, goddess of horses, was counted on for safe journeys and to watch over cavalry. The horned Cernons ruled the wild places and the world below. These gods were active, approachable figures, not distant creators. They could be asked for help, thanked for success, or called upon for protection. Druidic rituals brought together people from across the region at sacred spaces, steeped in meaning. The landscape was alive with gods and stories, and places like bubbling springs, ancient woods, and prominent hills became points where believers could touch the extraordinary. The ancient sanctuary at Gournay-sur-Renaud in northern France stands as evidence of just how intricate and important these sacred places were for the early Gauls. Archaeologists have uncovered striking proof of the Gauls' ritual world, revealing carefully arranged weapon deposits, animal offerings, and ceremonies that followed strict traditions, all overseen by the powerful Druidic priesthood. Among the most dramatic and unsettling practices was human sacrifice, a custom that shocked Roman writers and played a crucial part in Gallic spirituality. At sites like Ribemont-sur-Encoeur, physical evidence reveals prisoners of war taken in battle were sometimes killed in elaborate rituals and displayed publicly to honor the gods. These weren't acts of senseless brutality, but solemn, highly organized rites meant to secure divine protection or tip the balance in times of danger. For the Druids who directed these sacrifices, surrendering human life represented the highest form of devotion, especially in the lead-up to war or during times of great crisis. Besides these dramatic rituals, the Gauls placed enormous value on making offerings to water spirits. Time and again, archaeologists discover ancient caches at the bottoms of rivers, lakes, and bogs, carefully chosen gifts of swords, shields, jewelry, and tools hurled into the water, destined for the realm of the gods. One of the most famous finds, the Lilyn Cerrig Bar hoard in Wales, is a prime example. Over the centuries, objects of immense worth were purposefully dropped into a lake, not lost by accident, but given up as communal pledges and symbols of shared identity. While farming remained the economic heart of Gallic life, the broader world was never far away. Trade routes stretched for thousands of miles, linking these Iron Age tribes to distant Mediterranean shores and across the European continent. From the 2nd century BCE onward, mighty fortified towns known as oppida became the bustling hubs of commercial activity. Set atop hills and ringed by immense earthworks, these proto-cities teemed with thousands of residents, all engaged in a whirlwind of craftwork, trading, and administration. Bibracte, the capital of the Aedui tribe, stands out as a model, its sprawling layout divided into specialized districts dedicated to metalworking, pottery, and trade. The ingenuity of Gallic architecture shone through their vast defences. The so-called Murus Gallicus wall was a true marvel, stone faces reinforced internally by sturdy timber beams and iron nails. These constructions could withstand the pounding of siege engines and slow the advance of enemies wielding fire or ladders. The sophistication required for such engineering highlights just how organized and resourceful these communities became. The marketplace was abuzz with diversity. Amber carried all the way from the Baltic arrived for use in beautiful ornaments, while amphorae brimming with Mediterranean wine were traded, emptied, and repurposed as storage, their distinct shapes still turning up in archaeological digs. Tin from Britain, combined with copper, was smelted into bronze for everything from tools to sacred relics. Traders traveled well-worn routes, protected by mutual agreements between tribes, and some even minted their own gold coins. These coins, inspired at first by Greek and Roman models, quickly evolved into something deeply Celtic, embellished with stylized horses, intricate patterns, and symbols rich with local meaning. But Celtic coinage wasn't just about making purchases. Coins acted like miniature billboards for tribal power and identity, showing off the authority of chieftains, celebrating military victories, and honoring the gods. Some of the most distinctive coins like the famous rainbow cups of southern Germany, have no equal anywhere else and reflect the full inventiveness of Celtic thought and design. Iron Age Gaul's peak was in the artistry of its metalworkers. During the La Stène era, master craftsmen fused ideas from the classical Mediterranean with their own deep-rooted traditions, creating artifacts with swirling motifs, nature-inspired forms, and complex symbolism. Their work wasn't just for show. It reinforced both spiritual beliefs and social status. The Gundestrup cauldron, discovered in Denmark but with roots in the Celtic world, is perhaps the high point, a massive silver vessel, its sides alive with images of gods, mythological scenes, and mysterious ceremonies. Its panels are a window into the heart of Gallic faith and creativity, each image filled with meaning. Building on their advances in defense and art, the Gauls raised ceremonial sites as impressive as their fortresses, or large rectangular enclosures known as Virex Chanzen, built throughout southern Germany and eastern France, became centers for ritual. Within earthen boundaries, druids kept sacred fires burning and led the people in age-old ceremonies, waiting for the favor of the gods. These spaces were carefully set apart, emphasizing that here, in the hush between earth and sky, the human and divine could meet. Within the oppida themselves, timber halls stood tall, places for tribal gatherings, great feasts, and the making of crucial decisions. Using advanced carpentry, they erected vast structures that could hold hundreds at a time, raised platforms providing stages for leaders and honored guests. Even their personal adornment was an artful statement. Torques, the iconic gold neck rings blazed at important ceremonies. The Snettisham Great Torque, with its twisted strands of gold and elegantly wrought ends, exemplifies Celtic mastery and their love of statement pieces that broadcast not just wealth but also ancestry and pride. None of these achievements unfolded in isolation. As the Iron Age matured, the patchwork of small chieftains gave way to massive tribal confederations, each commanding loyalty and martial strength over wide territories. By 400 BCE, these groupings could unite tens of thousands under a single banner, with intricate systems of alliance and rivalry shaping the political landscape. The Helvetii, for instance, controlled the vital mountain passes of what's now Switzerland, sitting astride trade corridors that led from sunny Mediterranean towns to the broad northern plains. Their lands ran from Lake Geneva to the Rhine Valley, protected by daunting peaks and fortified settlements perched on high ground. The Helvetii made their living in dramatic ways, building terraced fields on steep slopes, moving herds seasonally to tap the best pastures, and extracting iron from local sources to craft outstanding weapons and tools. Their oppida rose high above the valleys, the steep sides making attack almost impossible. Cattle were more than food. They were portable banks of wealth that could be moved quickly in times of danger. The Helveti's social life was structured around 4 main clans, each ruling its own key sector of the mountains, led by noble families whose heritage and battle prowess secured their power. The leaders of these tribes didn't just rule from lofty halls. They gathered frequently at sanctuaries deep in the wild, where druids led sacred ceremonies meant to secure the blessing of the gods before any major decision. This blend of tradition and reverence created powerful bonds across the Confederation and set the stage for political unity. The real muscle behind their collective strength, though, came from their capacity to mobilize a staggering force, up to 90,000 experienced warriors ready to defend their land. These armies boasted not just foot soldiers, but fast-moving cavalry perfectly trained for fighting in the rugged highlands, giving them a formidable edge in both open battles and surprise raids among the peaks. East of the Helvetii, the Sequani secured their hold over the lush valleys of the Jura Mountains and the Upper Rhine. Their territory acted as a buffer zone, keeping Germanic invaders at bay while anchoring the connection between the Celtic heartland and the world beyond. Spanning nearly 8,000 square kilometers, their realm was a productive mix of fertile fields and deep woods, ideal both for farming and as a defensive refuge in times of war. Skilled at balancing diplomacy and defense, the Sequani forged robust ties with neighboring Germanic tribes through trade and joint military ventures, inviting foreign warriors and rare northern goods into their midst. The Sequani's approach to politics was as adaptable as their alliances. Their rulers brokered marriages and client relationships that reached across ethnic divides, weaving a web of influence throughout the borderlands. Their thriving capital Vesuntio rose on the dramatic curve of the Doubs River and was shielded naturally by steep terrain, making it almost impossible to overrun. It became a bustling marketplace, drawing traders from all quarters of northern Europe to barter and strike deals. Its immense walls, built using the ingenious Murus Gallicus method, could withstand even the most determined besiegers and protected a vibrant population of more than 10,000. When it came to war, the Sequani favoured adaptability. Their fighters drilled to handle both the open plains and tangled forests, and their cavalry, reinforced by Germanic allies and armed with long spears, struck quickly and withdrew before the enemy could strike back. This professional warrior class, sustained by regular tributes from subject lands and profits from busy trade routes, was always battle-ready and served as the backbone of Sequani power. Among all the tribal powers, the Aedui stood out for their vast domains stretching from the lower to the sown and the fertile lands between. With a population soaring past 400,000, their influence reached across central Gaul, marking them as one of the greatest Celtic superpowers before Rome. Their ability to rule this enormous territory rested on a sophisticated system. Instead of imposing royal control, they governed through alliances with client tribes, loyal communities and direct settlements, all coordinated through a network of trusted officials. By 200 BCE, the Aedui had pioneered a shift away from absolute monarchy. Instead, they introduced a rule by committee, a council of influential nobles who competed for the honour of annual elected office. At the top was the Vergobret, the highest position, handed out for just 1 year, with strict rules ensuring no single family could monopolise control for long. This setup allowed for regular rotation of power and prevented the rise of overbearing dynasties. The Aedui Assembly, a forum of delegates from their core settlements and allies, acted as the nerve centre, gathering at the great capital of Bibrac to set policy, decide on war or peace, and mediate disputes. No major public business was concluded without elaborate rituals. Druids presided, bestowing divine legitimacy on every critical choice and reinforcing the collective social order. This assembly wielded authority over crucial aspects, managing military command, setting taxes, and overseeing the election of officials, all with input from wide representation across the Confederation. Underpinning the Aedui's wealth and sway was their grip on vital trade corridors, especially those linking the Mediterranean with Britain and Northern Europe. Their merchants kept outposts abroad, expertly navigating the flows of tin, amber, wine, and luxury items, a commerce so robust that it warranted their own stunning coinage. Their gold and silver coins carried bold, original designs, loudly proclaiming autonomy and creative flair unmatched in the wider Celtic world. Elsewhere, the Arverni controlled the mountainous massifs of central France, locking down strategic river crossings and crucial highland passes. Covering 10,000 square kilometres, their lands straddled both tough terrain and key trade arteries. Their strength was built on a masterful blend of hard-won military tradition, tight rein over local mineral resources, and shrewd alliances that magnified their influence beyond just physical territory. The Arverni's rulers kept more of the old monarchical power than many others. For them, the king was not just a figurehead, but an active force in military and diplomatic affairs. These kingships passed down by ancient bloodlines weren't unchecked, though. Every major decision, war, peace, alliances, had to be discussed with respected councils of nobles and druids, whose advice carried real weight. In battle, the Arverni fielded large forces familiar with mountain combat, their warriors equipped with some of the region's best weaponry, expertly crafted by local smiths. Their cavalry, riding horses bred on high mountain pastures, proved especially effective negotiating the broken ground of their homeland. To coordinate their defences, the Arverni dotted their realm with signal towers and fortified hilltop outposts, ensuring they could rally their warriors quickly in times of crisis. Travel north and you'd find the Belgae, a distinctive people who carved out their power in the lowlands of northern Gaul. The stretch where the rivers Seine and Rhine wind through what's now Belgium and parts of France and the Netherlands. Unlike their southern cousins, the Belgae drew from both Celtic traditions and the fierce, pragmatic culture of neighbouring Germanic tribes, producing a hybrid society built for survival on the frontier. The Belgae united dozens of sub-tribes, each keeping its own identity but working together for mutual security. Because they lived on the edge of expanding rival powers, Belgae chiefs built and oversaw some of the strongest standing armies around. Their warriors didn't just fight, they also served as leaders and local administrators, handling daily affairs and keeping the tribes in line. Their fortifications mixed classic Celtic techniques with new ideas borrowed from Germanic neighbours, giving them the resilience to withstand sieges and the speed for lightning raids. Of course, nothing about these tribal territories was ever set in stone. Borders shifted constantly, shaped by campaigns, marriages, treaties, and migration. From time to time, the Helvetii pushed outward, conquering new valleys or forcing smaller tribes into vassalage. The Sequani took part in ongoing conflicts with Germanic clans, redrawing the ethnic and political map of the region as people were displaced or assimilated. Political evolution was a constant undercurrent. The old idea of kingship, resting on martial glory and divine right, was slowly replaced with more elegant, complex systems that balanced authority among many noble families and professional administrators. This transition happened at different speeds, and not all tribes followed the exact path. Some cultures clung to strong monarchies, while others leaned toward early forms of republicanism, placing limits on how much any one person could control. A major leap forward came with the appearance of magistrates, officials chosen by election for specific roles serving set terms. This shift helped distribute power and avoid the concentration that once led to tyranny. Whether known as the Vergobret among the Aedui or the Ambiorix among Belgian tribes, these new leaders created a professional class that could guide the vast machinery of tribal government. Assemblies that once were little more than huddles of bickering warriors grew into sophisticated parliaments, with orderly procedures for debate and decision-making, an evolution that prepared these societies for future crises and paved the way for the next chapter in their history. These tribal assemblies weren't just meetings for leaders. They served as courts for solving everything from land disputes to quarrels between social classes and rival communities. In the world of the Gauls, web-like systems of loyalty called clientage tied people across tribes. Powerful nobles gathered loyal supporters from far and wide, creating personal alliances that could be activated in times of danger or political upheaval. These bonds weren't loose promises. They were cemented through ceremonial oaths, gifts, and clear mutual expectations, ensuring that both lord and client stood by each other when it truly counted. The Druids stood at the center of both the sacred and the political. Beyond their priestly rites, they acted as skilled diplomats, smoothing relationships between tribes and upholding the unwritten laws that guided cross-tribal dealings. Druid schools even served as safe neutral territory, places where enemies could meet and talk terms without fear that the meeting would end with drawn swords. Their wisdom in legal matters and their reputation for impartial judgment made Druids the ultimate peacemakers in a society woven together by custom and loyalty. What emerged from these traditions was nothing less than political transformation, the birth of powerful confederations, organized and large enough to hold vast territories and many peoples under a single system. These new structures allowed for real diplomacy. Treaties could be negotiated, alliances forged, and entire regions coordinated to face outside dangers. As the balance of power shifted between these great coalitions, an intricate political chessboard emerged, one that lasted until the rise of an unrelenting new force from the south. By 200 BCE, mighty tribal federations dotted the landscape of Gaul, developing the same diplomatic habits and negotiation skills one might expect from any major state. But all of these carefully laid systems would soon be tested by the world's most formidable rising power. The first friction between Rome and the Gauls didn't spring from a simple Roman plan to dominate the north. It arose from a chain of defensive responses, anxieties triggered by unpredictable Celtic migrations and raids that sometimes spilled across the Alps and into Italian soil. Early exchanges between Romans and Gauls set the template for what was to come: wary standoffs, shifting alliances, and episodes of fierce violence. The first clash burned itself into the memory of both societies. In 390 BCE, the Senones, led by their war chief Brennus, swept down from the north, driven by disputes with the Etruscan city of Clusium and the hope of finding new land. Their force, some 30,000 strong, moved as a caravan of warriors, families, pack animals and household goods, a slow tidal wave looking for a place to settle, but ready to fight when challenged. The Romans never anticipated what they faced. Used to fighting neighbours who used familiar tactics, they now confronted Celtic warriors whose entire presence was meant to shock. Hair wild and bright with lime, bodies painted and tattooed, gold necklaces glinting, bronze armour shining, and the eerie howl of war horns rising over the fields. The Romans, numbering about 15,000, arranged themselves in the carefully drilled manipular formation, but this was built for the battles of the Italian plains, not for the swirling, unpredictable chaos of a Celtic assault. As the armies closed near the River Allier on July 18th, the difference in style became clear. The Gauls placed their seasoned champions at the heart of the charge, supported by young hotheads at the wings, with their swift cavalry poised to capitalize on any breach. Their battle wasn't about rigid lines. It was ferocious, personal, wild. They carried long iron swords perfect for sweeping slashes, sturdy wooden shields plus iron-tipped spears that could punch right through Roman armor. Everything about their attack, crashing trumpets, painted bodies, and earth-shaking charges, was designed to unnerve and overpower. The Roman line couldn't hold. Spooked by the relentless roar, the dizzying sights and sounds, Roman soldiers broke ranks and fled, chased down by merciless Celtic cavalry. What followed was disaster. Survivors scattered, standards lost, and the city of Rome itself left defenseless, garrisoned only by a desperate handful. The Gauls did not settle in for rule. They set about systematically ransacking the city, stripping it bare over 7 agonizing months. Their knowledge of siegecraft showed in the earthworks and relentless pressure they used. But for the Gauls, victory was measured in plunder and prestige, not permanent conquest. The siege ended only after tense ransom talks. The Gauls demanded a king's weight in gold, £1,000, before finally turning for home. The episode burned itself into Roman legend, especially the moment when Brennus, dissatisfied with the Roman offering, heaved his sword onto the scales and uttered, "Woe to the vanquished," symbolizing a humiliation Rome would never forget. The aftermath changed everything, far beyond simple destruction or lost wealth. The shame and fear of that loss sent shockwaves through Rome, triggering a complete overhaul of its military. The legions were restructured for flexibility and resilience. Recruitment broadened, and Rome's defences reinforced with new walls, proof of their newfound resolve to never suffer the same fate again. The legend of the Gallic sack haunted Rome. Generations of Romans grew up hearing stories of the wild Gauls, brave, terrifying, and always a latent threat. This fear fueled centuries of ambition and caution, cementing the Gauls in Roman eyes as both dangerous foes and worthy adversaries. As Roman power expanded, especially during campaigns into what would become Cisalpine Gaul, both sides adapted. The old static ways of fighting gave way to new battlefield innovations. The Romans became tactically agile. The Gauls learned from their southern rivals and began to use Mediterranean weapons and armor. The wars that followed grew more complex, featuring long sieges of well-fortified towns, sprawling cavalry chases across the wide plains, and grueling battles among the variable weather and steep passes of the Alps. One turning point came at the Battle of Telamon in 225 BCE, where Roman discipline and inventive tactics outmatched the raw intensity of the Celtic charge, showing the world that while the Gauls remained a force to be reckoned with, Rome was now ready to push northward and reshape the destiny of all of Gaul. The Gallic army, an alliance of nearly 70,000 warriors drawn from several tribes, marched into Roman lands, rallying in defense against Roman settlements, edging ever deeper into their ancestral territories. With their way of life threatened, these Celtic clans set aside rivalries to face a much larger foe. The Romans responded with overwhelming force, assembling 2 armies that together numbered some 150,000 men, including not just citizens, but also a vast array of allied cavalry and specialized troops. It was at the Battle of Telamon that Roman tactics proved decisive. The Gauls, renowned for their agility and ferocity, were caught in a coordinated trap, boxed in by armies converging from both front and rear. Their famed mobility, the heart of Gallic warfare, was rendered useless by Roman maneuvers that used the rugged landscape to pin them down. The battle itself was a brutal, day-long struggle, with Celtic warriors fighting furiously, despite being outnumbered. Slowly, Roman discipline and sheer force of numbers wore down Gallic resistance. This crushing defeat marked the end of organized Celtic power in northern Italy, opening the floodgates for Roman dominance in the region. Yet new threats soon loomed. In the late 2nd century BCE, the migration of the Cimbrian Teutones, massive Germanic tribes joined by families, herds, and all their possessions, swept like a tide that overwhelmed the defences of both Celts and Romans. Their search for fertile land unleashed chaos, displacing entire Celtic communities and threatening to overrun Roman frontiers. Rome's first attempts to stop them ended in disaster, with generals like Gnaeus Papirius Carbo and Marcus Junius Silanus suffering catastrophic losses. Germanic warriors, desperate and determined, shattered Roman lines and inflicted casualties so shocking they reverberated throughout the ancient world. The crisis peaked at the Battle of Arosio in 105 BCE, where Roman forces were utterly routed. Over 80,000 Romans and their allies fell, one of the darkest chapters in Republican history, which left Rome's northern provinces teetering on the brink. Out of this chaos emerged Gaius Marius, whose sweeping military reforms would forever change the face of Roman warfare. He turned the legions into a professional force, soldiers by trade, with standardized weapons, tight discipline, and years of hard training. No longer citizen farmers called up for the spring campaign, but lifelong warriors ready to take on the toughest foes. Marius put his new legions to the test during the desperate campaigns that followed. At Aquae Sextia in 102 BCE, he lured a vast enemy force, perhaps as many as 200,000, into attacking uphill against well-prepared Roman lines. Concentrated volleys of missiles rained down, blunting the Germanic charge and sowing panic in their ranks. The victory was absolute. At Vercellae in 101 BCE, Marius cemented his legacy by annihilating the remaining invaders, ending the immediate threat from the north. These campaigns not only established Roman supremacy in southern Gaul, but also gave Rome's armies priceless experience in fighting across every type of terrain, from the sun-baked coasts to the forested mountain valleys. Rome's consolidation of power became unmistakable with the creation of the province of Gallia Narbonensis in 121 BCE, their first foothold in Transalpine Gaul. This new territory, stretching along the Mediterranean from the Pyrenees to the Alps, was more than just land. It was a vital corridor connecting Italy to Spain and a forward base for further expansion. The province included bustling Greek cities like Massalia and Agatha, whose leaders sought Roman protection against Celtic raids. With a population rich in Celtic, Ligurian, and Greek traditions, Rome's administrators had to balance old tribal boundaries with new Roman laws, ensuring order while managing a patchwork of languages and customs. Military might still underpinned Roman control. Garrisons numbering around 15,000 kept the peace. Stationed at key fortresses throughout the land, Roman commanders welcomed Celtic warriors into their ranks, giving them a stake in the new order and learning essential lessons about local geography and tribal alliances. Meanwhile, the economy of Gallia Narbonensis flourished. Roman roads, aqueducts, and harbours sprang up, knitting together Gaul and the entire Mediterranean. The region supplied Rome with grain, manufactured wares, and valuable raw materials, fueling both economic growth and further Roman ambitions. The blending of cultures was inevitable. As Rome's grip tightened, the people of Gaul adopted Latin speech, Roman laws, and new ways of living. The process was not one-sided. Romans too found themselves influenced by Celtic customs and traditions, producing a rich cultural fusion that laid groundwork for the eventual integration of all Gaul into the empire. Yet beneath this transformation, tensions simmered. Ambitious Gallic leaders competed for Roman favour, seeking wealth and advancement, while traditionalists resented their eroding power and ways of life. The seeds of future conflict were sown even as Roman roads traced ever further into the heart of Celtic Europe. The divisions among the Celtic tribes set the stage for the seismic events that enabled Caesar to conquer Gaul. Among all the factions, the Aedui rose to prominence as Rome's closest allies, formalizing their partnership through detailed treaties. These agreements elevated the Aedui to the status of friends and allies of the Roman people, binding both sides to mutual military support and commercial exchange. In return, the Aedui gained a major edge against local rivals, while Rome secured a strategic foothold right at the heart of Celtic Europe. But not all were eager to bend toward Rome. Saliverni and several Belgic confederations led the charge against foreign influence, determined to defend Celtic autonomy and age-old traditions. These tribes clung to their ancestral ways, resisting both Roman politics and religion, and worked to build alliances against further Roman encroachment. The tension between camps, one looking to Rome for support, the other for unity against it, created a dangerous instability, a house of cards just waiting for a spark. That spark came in the spring of 58 BCE, when the powerful Helvetii Confederation announced they would abandon their Alpine homeland and migrate west in search of new ground. The reasons were many: a swelling population, threats from aggressive Germanic neighbours across the Rhine, and dwindling resources at home. This was no haphazard flight. It was a methodical, almost surgical dismantling of their society. Granaries were stripped, defensive walls pulled down and tools destroyed, leaving no trace from which to rebuild. For years, the Helvetii prepared for this migration, gathering food, forging alliances with tribes on their route, and readying the wagons and supplies needed to move an entire nation. Their census, later seized by Roman scouts, counted 368,000 people, including 92,000 fully armed warriors. The scale of the movement was staggering, a mobile city trailing for miles through valleys and mountain passes, every village, family and herd rolling forward in a single unstoppable column. Choosing their path was a political chess game. The quickest option, straight through the Rhone Valley, was blocked by hostile Germanic tribes. The alternative, passing through Roman-controlled lands, meant confronting a superpower alert to any perceived threat. Their solution was to skirt Roman territory, negotiating with the Sequani and the Aedui, ancient bonds and reputations swinging the deal, counting on promises of hospitality and the unspoken dread their warriors inspired. News of the Helvetii exodus reached Caesar as he was serving as proconsul in southern Gaul. He immediately recognized the situation as both threat and golden opportunity, a roiling crisis that could justify plunging Roman power directly into Gallic affairs. Caesar wasted no time. He summoned the 10th Legion from its winter camp and dashed to Geneva, covering the ground in just 8 days, a testament to Rome's network of couriers and Caesar's own sense of drama. But with only about 4,800 soldiers on hand, he was outnumbered by the advancing Helvetii, hundreds to one too few for open battle, but enough to hold the key crossing. Roman engineers got to work, building a 19-mile barricade along the Rhone, an earthen rampart crowned by wooden palisades and fronted by a ditch bristling with sharpened stakes. The efficiency and precision shown in this project highlighted exactly what made the Romans so formidable: massive coordinated labour unfolding at lightning speed. The Helvetii, true to their diplomatic ways, first tried negotiation, dressed in gold torques, and bearing splendid arms. Their noble envoys entered talks, appealing for safe passage with the careful ceremony and persuasive rhetoric their people held dear. But Caesar, seeing both the danger and the prize, denied their request outright. Blocked, the Helvetii sought other options, and soon turned their march into the lands of Rome's allies, the Sequani and Aedui. Here, Celtic loyalties and old promises collided with new realities, as some were swayed by the Helvetii's threats or generous compensation, even when it meant breaking word to Rome. It was in these muddled crossroads of shifting alliances and divided loyalties that Caesar found his opening, a moment that would reshape not only his own destiny, but the fate of all Gaul, and ultimately, the Roman Empire itself. When the Helvetii pushed through Sequani lands, chaos followed in their wake. The sheer number of migrants meant villages emptied almost overnight, their herds stripped pastures clean, stored grain ran out, and tensions spiked between desperate newcomers and the farmers whose livelihoods were at risk. Skirmishes broke out as Helvetia warriors, used to simply taking what they needed, ran into Sequani locals determined to defend their fields and flocks. Soon, what started as a migration became a region-wide emergency. The threat of famine loomed, and violence simmered just below the surface. This sprawling crisis was the turning point that drew Rome even deeper into Gallic affairs. Caesar, never one to hesitate, justified a bold intervention. He argued that Rome was obliged to protect its allies, and that unchecked Helvetii movement would threaten regional stability. Yet everyone knew the legal basis was shaky, a technicality stretched to cover what was really at heart, a bid for dominance. Nevertheless, Caesar acted fast, summoning fresh legions from northern Italy and rallying local auxiliary forces until his army ballooned to over 40,000 troops. This new Roman force was the living proof of 2 generations of military evolution. Caesar's 6 legions, nearly 28,000 hardened infantry, were drilled, equipped, and organized with unmatched efficiency. Each soldier packed the classic Roman arsenal, the short gladius sword for tight stabbing combat, pila, iron-tipped javelins engineered to pierce and then bend, rendering enemy shields useless, and the scutum, a broad shield perfect for holding firm against charging foes. Alongside the infantry marched thousands of cavalry, including an elite force supplied by the Aedui, 4,000 mounted warriors whose long experience in the region made them invaluable scouts and shock troops. What set this army apart, though, was how Roman and Gallic elements fused together. The Aedui cavalry brought their own style of fighting, expert in the saddle, wielding long Celtic swords and spears, yet now shaped by Roman tactics and command structures. The result was a force more versatile and coordinated than anything the Helvetii had ever faced. The crisis reached its climax in June 58 BCE, on a hillside near the Aedui capital of Bibracte. Tired of being hounded and bolstered by numbers, the Helvetii challenged Caesar head-on. Arrayed across nearly 2 kilometers of slope, over 60,000 Celtic warriors stepped forward, their ranks glittering with bronze and iron as sunlight flashed from shields and swords. Echoing across the field, the deep blare of their Carnix war trumpets stirred ancient fears. But the Romans stood ready, their legendary discipline evident in the methodical 3-line formation, the triplex aces, placing the youngest soldiers up front, seasoned veterans behind, and the toughest triarii in reserve. As the Helvetii surged forward, the Romans unleashed a storm of well-timed pilum volleys. These heavy javelins smashed through Celtic shields, punched holes in their lines, and brought both confusion and terror. Each impact didn't just wound, it left the warriors exposed, gaps forming where they once stood shoulder to shoulder. The physical and psychological toll was clear. What started as an unstoppable tide quickly became a fragmented assault. In the wild melee that followed, the Roman advantage became clear. Legionaries, packed close and backed by their massive shields, fought together in pairs, one defending, the other thrusting with deadly precision. Their gladia found the weak points in Celtic armor, a weapon designed for stabbing in chaos, not waving overhead in single combat. The Celts, for all their courage, couldn't match this level of training and coordination when the fight narrowed to shield brutality. The battle's turning point came when Caesar finally unleashed his reserves. The triarii swept forward to flank the Helvetii from one side, while the allied cavalry attacked from the rear, surrounded and battered from multiple directions. Panic rippled down the Helvetii ranks. What began as a stubborn defense turned into chaos, as escape routes vanished and Roman pressure grew relentless. Even in victory, Roman discipline never faltered. The legions stayed in formation as they pressed their advantage, ensuring there would be no Celtic rally, no second wind. Their cavalry, guided by Aedui allies who knew the land, chased down fleeing warriors, capturing thousands and destroying any hope of regrouping. After the dust settled, the scope of the Roman triumph was total. Caesar's men overran the Helvetii camp. Inside, they discovered not only the remnants of an army, but also a nation in flight. Families, elders, children, all who couldn't escape the earlier fighting. Among the conquered materials, Roman officers found records, censuses and documents that revealed just how organized the Helvetii had been, a treasure trove of intelligence on Celtic society and manpower. But Caesar understood something crucial: outright destruction or mass enslavement would create an even greater crisis. So instead of absorbing or erasing the Helvetii, he ordered the survivors returned to their devastated Alpine homeland and commanded them to rebuild. In doing so, he diffused a flashpoint, sent a message to the rest of Gaul, and demonstrated that Roman power could both conquer and reshape the future, all in a single campaign. By ordering the Helvetii to return home, Caesar sent a powerful message, one that created a buffer zone against Germanic invaders, and let other Celtic tribes see the Romans as both conquerors and potential protectors. Hardly had the dust settled before a new, far more ominous threat emerged across the Rhine. A Germanic king named Ariovistus was building his own empire at the edge of Celtic Europe. His relentless advances, blending ruthless conquest with backdoor deals, threatened to tip the balance of power in a way not seen for centuries. The Sequani, desperate for help against their long-standing rivals the Aedui, made a fateful mistake. They invited Ariovistus in, granting his warriors land and the right to settle in Gaul. Before long, his following swelled over 120,000 strong, with waves of families, fighters and dependents, carving out new strongholds on land taken from the Celts. In just a few years, these Germanic settlers transformed the landscape, founding fortified villages and gradually pushing aside established Celtic communities, threatening to replace local traditions with their own. The Germanic warriors who crossed into Gaul could not have been more different from their Celtic counterparts. Towering, fair-skinned and physically imposing, they inspired dread wherever they went. Their arsenal included massive two-handed swords, heavy spears designed to be thrown or wielded up close, and solid wooden shields capped with iron bosses, tools made as much for smashing as for defense. Their reputation for brutal combat, merciless raids, and even human sacrifice added a supernatural edge to their enemies' fear. But this clash was as much about culture as it was about weapons. The Germanic newcomers brought unfamiliar rituals, legal codes, and social customs that clashed with everything the Gauls held dear. Their takeover hinted not just at territorial conquest, but at a wave of cultural erasure, a future where Celtic identity could be lost forever. As the Aedui found themselves pressed on all sides, they turned to Rome, invoking their alliance and demanding help. This gave Caesar the pretext he needed to step in, legally justified by Rome's treaty-promised obligation to defend their friends. The Aedui's plea came with harrowing stories: nobles displaced, villages razed, and Germanic warlords ruling by sheer force. Caesar's strategy, true to Roman style, began with diplomacy. He sent a delegation to Ariovistus, hoping for a negotiated boundary that would spare the region further bloodshed. His envoys spoke the language and brought military escorts to make clear their intentions and Rome's strength. Ariovistus, for his part, saw only opportunity and power. He dismissed Roman demands, threatened their allies, and insisted his conquest was the rightful outcome of war. Any Roman interference, he declared, was both unjust and unwelcome. With talks shattered, it was clear that war was coming, and it wouldn't be a fight like any Caesar had faced before. Roman scouts and Gallic informants reported that Ariovistus controlled a force equal to the largest Celtic confederacies, but with even more ferocious fighters. His cavalry rode sturdy horses built for long raids and devastating charges, posing a lethal threat to Roman supply lines and stragglers. Preparing for this campaign pushed the Roman war machine to its limits. Vast quantities of supplies, food, arms, gear had to move across hostile territory and be safeguarded along the way. Building strongholds and establishing secure supply lines meant winning support or at least neutrality from local Gauls, whose loyalty was uncertain and whose grievances simmered just below the surface. As news of the coming showdown spread, dread rippled through the Roman legions. Wild rumors exaggerated the size, strength, and cruelty of the enemy, eroding morale. Tales of Germanic warriors who never took prisoners and practiced grisly rites made the coming battle feel as much a struggle between civilizations as a clash of armies. Caesar, ever the commander and showman, sprang into action to banish fear and kindle resolve. He gathered his troops, and delivered a rallying speech, extolling Roman discipline, reminding them of their triumph over the Helvetii, and stoking dreams of glory and reward. He insisted that their cause was just, and that Roman valor would prevail against any foe. The march toward Ariovistus's stronghold led the Romans through a patchwork of Gallic lands, each tribe weighing whether to aid Caesar, resist, or hedge their bets. Every step required careful diplomacy. Supplies could only be secured through negotiation as much as force, and the threat of Germanic raids remained ever present. These campaigns, from the defeat of the Helvetii onward, planted the seeds of deep resentment among the Gauls. At first, many had greeted Roman power as a protective shield or even a civilizing force. But the brutal crackdowns, the crushing of the Eburones, the harsh suppression of the Belgae, the destruction of entire villages in the name of order, turned admiration into growing fury. By the winter of 53–52 BCE, stories of Roman brutality, mass enslavement, and the systematic wiping out of Celtic ways were circulating in every tribal council. What started as cautious optimism had soured into outrage and despair, ensuring that the struggle for Gaul was far from over. The spark that ignited the largest revolt against Roman rule in Gaul came from an unexpected corner, the Carnutes, a relatively obscure tribe whose lands held the ancient groves where druids from every corner of Gaul gathered yearly for their most sacred rituals. Up to that point, the Carnutes had walked a delicate line, never throwing their weight fully behind the Romans, yet steering clear of open resistance. But in early 52 BCE, they shattered this neutrality with a daring and brutal act. They slaughtered the Roman merchants and settlers at Cenabum, breaking not only the heavy hand of Roman authority, but also violating the deep Celtic bonds of hospitality. This was no ordinary outburst of violence. It was meticulously executed, hinting at a network of communication far deeper than the Romans had suspected. Within mere hours, beacon fires flared from hilltops, carrying the news like a pulse through the heart of every Celtic tribe. In a single day, the entire land from the Atlantic to the Rhine was alight with the promise of rebellion. Roman intelligence had entirely underestimated just how closely the Druids had woven these secret lines of connection, patiently preparing for the fateful day when all of Gaul might rise in unison. The psychological shock of the Carnutes' action quickly swept far beyond its immediate military impact. The murdered Romans, traders, administrators, the human face of Caesar's so-called civilization were clear warnings that Roman power had limits, and that the subjugated people of Gaul still possessed the will and organization to strike back. Reports of executions, torture, even ritual sacrifices of Roman officials spread quickly. Such acts, shocking to Romans, were rooted in Druidic teachings that painted the Romans as enemies of everything sacred. The revolt had begun with blood, but now it spread like wildfire, an act of defiance with deep spiritual overtones. The response across Gaul showed just how much anti-Roman sentiment had festered below the surface. The Arverni, who had largely steered clear of earlier conflicts, now emerged at the forefront of the resistance, holding secret gatherings in remote mountain strongholds. In these shadowy councils, tribal leaders and Druidic envoys debated what had once seemed impossible, uniting all of Gaul under a single banner, determined to drive out the occupiers once and for all. For the first time, messengers from dozens of tribes broke bread together, putting aside old feuds in the face of a shared enemy. What emerged was a true pan-Gallic movement, something no one, Roman or Celtic, had seen before. Into this storm stepped a new kind of leader, Vercingetorix, a young noble from the Arverni whose very name meant overking of warriors. Charismatic and sharp, he was uniquely positioned to bridge tradition and innovation. Trained from childhood as a Celtic warrior, he had also learned Roman tactics firsthand, his father having once worked alongside Roman officials. Vercingetorix's appeal lay in his ability to channel the ancient spirit of Gallic heroism, while understanding exactly what would be needed to fight the Romans on their own terms. His rise wasn't without struggle. The established Arverni nobles, more comfortable with securing favors from Rome than waging open war, initially opposed him. But Vercingetorix drew his power from the younger generation, battle-hardened warriors and humble farmers, who had lost land and freedom to Caesar's grip. This shift in leadership echoed a transformation sweeping across the tribes. For the first time, voices that had rarely mattered in political decisions were now at the heart of the rebellion. The assembly that proclaimed Vercingetorix as supreme war chief drew support from every class, signaling a new era of unity. Vercingetorix also broke the mold of Gallic warfare. Instead of relying on patchwork bands fighting for glory, he forged a disciplined professional army built around shared training, tactical coordination, and a single chain of command. Under his banner, some 80,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry, equipped with a mix of local craftsmanship and gear copied from Roman prisoners, assembled from tribes across central and western Gaul. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about a strategic mind keenly aware of Caesar's strengths and weaknesses. Learning from Roman campaigns, Vercingetorix aimed to cripple Caesar's logistics. Coordinated uprisings would sever Roman supply lines, stretch their forces thin, and trap them in a web of simultaneous attacks no central force could withstand. The opening moves of the rebellion were a masterstroke of timing and planning. As one, tribes rose up, storming Roman forts, raiding outposts, and taking back key towns. At Avaricum, the Carnutes obliterated the garrison at Cenabum. The Parisii seized Lutetia, ambushing Roman merchants and reclaiming a capital long under foreign rule. News of these victories travelled as swiftly as the initial warning fires. The Romans were caught off guard, scattered in small garrisons meant for peacekeeping, not open warfare. Thinking they faced isolated troubles, many Roman commanders fell back on routine tactics, unprepared for a campaign coordinated across the entire country. When word of the revolt reached Caesar, he was far from the heart of the action, entangled in precarious political battles in Italy. His ambitions for the consulship and deepening feud with Pompey were already straining his position. But the Gallic crisis threatened everything: his military fame, his political fortune, and perhaps even his life. Realizing the stakes, Caesar mounted an immediate return to Gaul, braving the harshest winter conditions and putting every logistical system of the Roman state into motion. The forced march that brought him back north was not just a testament to Roman roads and order, but to Caesar's iron will, the very qualities that had fueled Rome's rise, now hurtling it into one final epic confrontation with the Celtic world. Against the howling winds and biting snows of the Alps, Caesar once again demonstrated why he was Rome's master of improvisation and speed. In less than 3 weeks, a feat that seemed impossible, he assembled a force of 10,000 hardened soldiers, crossed the treacherous mountain passes in winter secrecy, and charged into Gaul with breathtaking swiftness. This whirlwind march was a triumph of logistics and discipline, catching both friend and foe by complete surprise. News of Caesar's arrival swept through the Celtic camps like a chill. Where moments before many Gauls had believed the Romans doomed, now there was a collective gasp of dread. The element of surprise, more than swords or numbers, shattered Celtic momentum. Caesar's first major challenge came at Gergovia, the heart of Arverni power and Vercingetorix's home ground. The city, perched atop a high plateau nearly 400 meters above the valley floor, bristled with defenses. Its walls combined the best of Celtic ingenuity and lessons painfully learned from watching Roman sieges elsewhere. Steep, rocky slopes made it impossible for Romans to repeat their favorite tactic, building encircling siege walls and battering the defenders into submission from all sides. Standard siege engines, so effective on level ground, were helpless here. This battlefield was chosen to erase every Roman advantage. But the struggle for Gergovia also revealed a new kind of adversary. Vercingetorix, once a typically bold Celtic warlord, had transformed into a true master of strategy. Forget wild charges. This time he relied on careful defense. His army wasn't just a mob of proud warriors, it was a disciplined, well-organized force, with specialized units stationed at critical points and ready to shift in response to any Roman maneuver. The defenders understood their home terrain intimately, and every advantage, every hidden ravine, every fortified outwork was leveraged to blunt the Roman assault. Vercingetorix's cavalry, traditionally a ragtag group of scouts and quick raiders, was now a real fighting force. 8,000 horsemen patrolled the hinterlands, ceaselessly attacking Roman foraging parties and cutting Caesar's supply lines. Communications to other Roman outposts grew perilous, every message a gamble, every wagon train a target. The Romans tried a direct assault. Caesar sent 15,000 legionaries clawing their way up the southern slopes, shields locked, banners flashing beneath the city walls. For a brief, glittering moment, the attack seemed to work. The Romans smashed through several outer defences and pushed to within sight of the city's heart. But then, the trap was sprung. The Gauls, fighting as a single unit, carved up isolated Roman groups, exploiting gaps and driving the legionaries back with devastating force. Arrow storms and precise counterattacks rained down. The Romans, for all their discipline, couldn't hold. When the retreat was sounded, 700 Romans were dead, one of the darkest days in Caesar's campaigns and a mark of glory for the Celtic resistance. The shockwaves from Gergovia were immediate and far-reaching. For the first time, it was proven Rome could be beaten in open battle if Celtic tribes united, fought smart, and played to their strengths. Or suddenly, tribes who'd previously stood on the sidelines came pouring into Vercingetorix's camp. Even the Aedui, Caesar's oldest and most powerful Gallic allies, began to waver, publicly promising loyalty, but secretly sending envoys to the rebel camp. This hinted at an existential threat to Rome's hold over Gaul. If a domino effect of defections unfolded, Caesar's entire foundation would collapse. Both leaders now knew the war had changed. Caesar faced a grim truth. Lightning strikes and classic tactics were useless against an enemy who refused open-field battles, and instead targeted his weak points, drawing out the conflict and bleeding the Roman army through attrition and guerrilla tactics. For Vercingetorix, the Gergovia victory was a beginning, not an end. Rome was far from destroyed. He called a council of tribal chiefs in the wake of triumph, drawing representatives from over 60 tribes. Old rivalries flared as everyone debated how best to channel their new strength and what future a free Gaul might look like. Strategically, the decision was made to gather every able-bodied man at Alesia, a mighty hill fort belonging to the Mandubia tribe. Built atop steep ridges and crossroads, Alesia offered both protection and logistical advantages. The defenders had access to food and outside help, and the stronghold's position made it the ultimate rallying point for the armies of a united Gaul. Inside, some 80,000 warriors assembled, the greatest Celtic force ever seen. In the surrounding hills, another 250,000 men prepared for battle and relief operations, transforming the landscape into a sea of banners and expectation. Rome answered this challenge with its own supreme effort. Caesar, grasping that the coming siege would decide the fate of both powers, summoned every available legion, 8 in all, plus auxiliaries and allied cavalry, for a total force nearing 60,000 men. Never before had Rome committed so many to a single campaign in Gaul. The siege began with a display of Roman engineering genius. In days, the legions ringed Alesia with double walls, a technique honed in earlier wars, but now raised to colossal scale. The inner wall, or circumvallation, pinned the Celts inside, cutting them off from aid and hope of breakout. The outer wall, the contravallation, barred the approach of the massive relief army gathering in the countryside. Ditches, ramparts, wooden palisades, and deadly traps turned the entire valley into a killing ground, a fortress built around a fortress. Inside Alesia, tension rose by the hour. Every chief, every druid, every warrior knew the fate of a nation hung in the balance. Outside, the greatest military machine the world had ever seen prepared for one final earth-shaking struggle. Building the massive siege lines around Alesia was a feat that pushed Roman engineering and manpower to the limit. The first wall, known as the circumvallation, snaked around the entire hill, following every dip and rise for 16 kilometers. Where the rugged ground offered natural barriers, the Romans built new ones, deep trenches loaded with sharpened stakes, towering earthen ramparts topped with wooden palisades, and stonework stiffened with iron spikes. Everything about these defenses announced a level of sophistication that only centuries of military expertise could produce. The second ring, the contravallation, was even more daunting, stretching nearly 21 kilometers, loaded with traps, barricades, and hidden killing fields. These layers were designed to shred any army trying to break through from the outside, funneling attackers right into the waiting blades of the defenders. Construction went on day and night, squads of soldiers, each with a specialized task, laboring under constant threat of Celtic counterattacks. Inside Alasia, life turned bleak. The city's usual population, maybe 15,000, exploded overnight with the arrival of 80,000 warriors and countless followers. Food supplies shrank rapidly, waste piled up, and panic simmered beneath the surface as the Roman curtain tightened. The blockade sealed off every approach, no one in, nothing out, forcing cruel rationing and mounting fear. Both sides pressured mines as much as bodies. Caesar ordered siege towers and artillery to menace the defenders night and day, a constant reminder that he could and would wait forever. Vercingetorix, meanwhile, rallied his troops with displays of unity, fiery speeches and rituals led by druids who proclaimed heaven's blessing on every act of resistance. Then, the most critical moment of the war arrived. The great Celtic relief army led by Vercingetorix's kinsman Vercingetorix swept into view, nearly 250,000 strong, the largest host Gaul had ever seen. All across the region, tribes had answered the call, determined to break the siege and shatter Roman hopes once and for all. But moving an army of that size was no easy task. Without modern communication, orders sometimes lagged, confusion set in, and synchronizing attacks with the warriors trapped inside. Alasia became a logistical nightmare. The battle opened with a tidal assault, as forces both inside and outside the walls timed their efforts for maximum effect. While those penned within launched desperate sorties against the Roman lines, the relief army hammered at the outer wall, pouring all their fury into breaching Caesar's defences. All through the chaos, Roman soldiers fought on two fronts at once, holding their ground against surging Gauls in front, defending against breakout attempts from behind, all while the sky darkened with missiles and the cries of the wounded echoed over the fields. Hours of fighting turned the battlefield into a cauldron of blood and confusion. Roman lines flexed and bent, but somehow held until the most decisive moment of all. Caesar himself, draped in his iconic scarlet cloak, rode to the faltering segment of the line at the head of his cavalry. His sudden presence, a living legend on the field, sent a shiver through weary Roman ranks and struck terror on the Gaulish side. As his horsemen crashed into the enemy flanks, panic swept through the massed Celts. First one wedge, then another, broke and fled, turning defeat into a rout. That single charge broke the will of the relief army. What had been the pride of Celtic Europe dissolved into shattered fragments, warriors abandoning standards and weapons as they scattered over the countryside. The psychological shock of such a loss was devastating. Word sped through every village and stronghold that Rome's grip was unbreakable. That resistance, no matter how furious, was now hopeless. Inside Alasia, the end soon followed. Vercingetorix gathered his stripped-down honour, donning his finest armour, and surrendered himself to Caesar. He hoped, perhaps, that this final gesture would earn mercy for his people. The moment, one of history's great confrontations, echoed with tragedy, the fallen king face to face with the man who had destroyed his world, kept on display for 6 years before being ceremoniously executed at Caesar's triumph. Vercingetorix's fate became both legend and warning. Alasia's defeat did more than end a war. It shattered the old Celtic order, sweeping aside tribal confederations and leaders who had dared to dream of freedom. Now Caesar faced a new challenge, ruling over nearly 4 million conquered souls, forging unity out of chaos, profit from ashes, and loyalty from old enmity. He wasted no time breaking the power of the tribes. Old assemblies and magistracies were dissolved, replaced with Roman civil units, civitates designed to split up the strongest alliances and force old enemies to live together under watchful Roman eyes. In time, this administrative scheme grew bolder. Rome was divided into the 3 Gauls under Augustus, a solution that recognized not just the conquered territory's vastness, but its dazzling diversity of languages, cultures, and traditions. Over the coming decades, Romans and Celts would blend religions, customs, and everyday life, creating a hybrid identity that would define not just Gaul, but the heart of Western Europe for centuries after. The province of Gallia Aquitania spread across the southwestern lands of Gaul, edging from the Pyrenees to the Loire River. These territories had long been influenced by close ties with Iberian peoples, preserving a culture distinct from their neighbours to the east and north. Spanning roughly 150,000 square kilometres, Aquitania included over 40 civitates, local districts that echoed the complex tribal mosaic that existed before Rome's arrival. Its capital, at Burdigala, modern Bordeaux, burst into life as a commercial hub, channeling trade from the Atlantic coast all the way down to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. Farther north lay Gallia Lugdunensis, by far the largest of Rome's Gallic provinces. It reached from the Loire Valley all the way to the English Channel, sweeping up the lands of the most powerful tribal confederacies from the pre-conquest era. Here, the fertile plains sustained enormous populations, and the hills were rich in minerals, a source of prosperity, but once also the war chest that fueled years of Celtic resistance. Lugdunum, what we now call Lyon, sat strategically, where the Rhone and Saône rivers meet, growing into the beating heart of provincial power. It was more than just an administrative centre. It became the spiritual core of Roman Gaul, crowned by the grand altar of Rome and Augustus, where the empire's cultic ceremonies united rulers and subjects alike. In the north, Gallia Belgica formed a bulwark from the Seine to the Rhine, an area always shaped by the ebb and flow of Germanic neighbours across the river. Its location made Belgica a vital buffer protecting the empire's frontiers. It also sat astride the trade arteries linking Britain to the heart of the continent. Governing these lands was particularly challenging. Roman administrators had to navigate a patchwork of Germanic settlers who had crossed into Gaul even before the Roman conquest, and Celtic communities that over centuries of contact and intermarriage had begun adopting Germanic ways as their own. One of the most profound changes brought by Rome was the arrival of written law. Once justice in Gaul was handed down by Druids who relied on memory. Oral codes of precedent that differed from tribe to tribe and emphasized responsibilities shared by the community. Roman law, on the other hand, came encoded in official documents, presided over by trained magistrates. Disputes were now settled by reference to uniform rules that applied across every corner of the empire. Individual responsibility, rather than collective guilt, became the standard. This new approach fundamentally reshaped how people understood crime, contract, and property. This legal revolution unlocked new possibilities for ambitious Celtic nobles. Those educated in Roman schools or who had served in the auxiliary ranks of the legions learned how to navigate the labyrinth of Roman jurisprudence. They emerged as indispensable intermediaries, men and women who could move effortlessly between the ways of their ancestors and the demands of the imperial bureaucracy, amassing more power and wealth than ever would have been possible under purely tribal rule. Roman courts sprang up in every major town, offering locals new venues for resolving disputes. For merchants and landowners, the appeal was undeniable: contracts written down, property rights guaranteed, and predictable rules that protected investments and fostered commercial growth. As legal norms merged, a hybrid began to take shape. Roman procedures fused with local customs, administered by magistrates often drawn from established Celtic families. This blend helped ensure order without provoking rebellion, and gave the legal system a face familiar to the people it governed. As these changes swept the land, language itself began to shift. Latin took hold in city halls, markets, and schools, creating incentives for the Celtic elite to become fluent in the tongue of the empire. Roman educational institutions in the new urban centres taught young nobles the art of rhetoric, literature, and law, paving their way to positions of influence in both provincial and imperial circles. Yet in the countryside, in places where old ways lingered, Celtic languages endured. Farmers and shepherds held on to their native speech, even as they gradually borrowed new Latin words for everything from legal matters to farming tools and religion. The result was a tapestry of dialects, half Roman, half Celtic, uniquely Gallo-Roman in character. The adoption of Roman customs by local elites was not always mere imitation or flattery. For many, the Mediterranean lifestyle genuinely appealed. Roman villas sprouted across the landscape, built with stone walls, glass windows, and for the wealthy, even underfloor heating. These homes were a far cry from the old roundhouses of wood and thatch, anchored by smoky hearths that once dotted the hills. Not only did they showcase the wealth and taste of their owners, but they also became symbols of a new cosmopolitan society. Roman-style public baths, a novelty at first, quickly caught on, even among populations famous for their own communal traditions. Bath houses became the center of social life, places for gossip and business where tribal barriers blurred. Wealthy local patrons paid for the construction of these luxurious facilities, eager to broadcast their status as both successful Celts and loyal Romans. The transformation from hill forts and fortified villages to true cities was one of the most dramatic changes under Roman rule. The old oppida, perched on hilltops for defense, were gradually abandoned in favor of towns laid out on a grid, complete with central forums, basilicas, and planned districts. These new cities provided all the infrastructure necessary for government, commerce, and culture, offering an unprecedented quality of life for growing urban populations. At the heart of each city stood the Forum complex, a stage where life in the province was organized and displayed. The basilicas held courtrooms for legal battles, spaces for trade, and halls for civic gatherings. Temples ran along their flanks, welcoming both old Celtic gods and Roman deities. Cults intertwined, turning spiritual life into another bridge between cultures. Theatres and amphitheatres rose, funded by the generous donations of Celtic nobles, eager to put their stamp on civic life. These venues soon presented a blend of Roman entertainments and Celtic traditions, evidence of just how thoroughly Gallo-Roman society was blending the old with the new. Even home life reflected these vast changes. Where once families huddled around a single smoky room, now they dined in rectangular stone houses with ornate mosaics, heated floors, and glass to keep out the cold. To modern eyes, these might seem small changes, but to the Celts who witnessed these transformations, it was nothing short of a new world, one that merged their ancestral pride with the sweeping power and allure of Rome. These architectural transformations were much more than a matter of style. They signaled a deep shift in daily life and society. As Roman influence seeped into every aspect of Gallic culture, the old ways, centuries of tradition shaped by tribal loyalties, gave way to a new world of opportunity and upward mobility. Ambitious nobles, once limited by the boundaries of their clan or region, suddenly discovered paths that could carry them from the fields of Gaul to the upper ranks of Rome itself. For those who embraced the new order, the rewards were immense. Rome bestowed honors and clearly mapped out careers for local elites willing to serve the empire, first as judges and administrators in their home districts, then as regional governors, and for the most fortunate, as high officials in the imperial government. The Roman cursus honorum, a structured ladder of public offices, promised social prestige and lasting influence undreamed of in the days of tribal councils. Military service became the great equalizer and unifier. Many young Celtic nobles began their journey toward Rome within the auxiliary cavalry and infantry units. There they learned not only new fighting tactics but also Roman customs, discipline, and networks of loyalty that stretched across the empire. Veterans came home transformed, armed with connections, fluent in Latin, and ready to bridge the worlds of Celt and Roman. Their ties to Roman officials helped absorb their communities into the broader web of the empire, smoothing the way for economic and political integration. It wasn't long before whole equestrian families, rising elites descended from old tribal leaders, stood at the center of this new society. Havres, these were the pillars of Roman Gaul, landowners, merchants, former soldiers, and administrators, each with sons educated in the law of both worlds. Their family businesses stretched along trade routes from the Atlantic to Rome, their influence felt from provincial assemblies to the inner circles of the imperial court. Religion, too, underwent a remarkable fusion. The old gods of the Celts did not simply vanish. Instead, Rome's policy of interpretatio encouraged the blending of beliefs. Celtic deities were associated with Roman ones. Lugus became Mercury. Epona took on the traits of Diana, and Cernunnos found himself paired with Silvanus. New temple complexes combined Roman engineering with sacred groves and pools, accommodating both old rites and new ceremonies. On the surface, these shrines bore Roman columns and mosaics, But deep within lay caches where ancient votive offerings accumulated, symbols of a living, breathing spiritual tradition still beating beneath the marble and tile. The Druids, stripped of political and legal power, retreated to hidden places, becoming keepers of memory and education. Their underground schools, tucked away in distant forests and mountain valleys, became centers for the tradition, passing down stories and customs beyond the reach of Roman courts. The economic revolution sparked by Romanization touched every facet of life. With Roman coinage replacing old barter-based economies, trade boomed as never before. Celtic producers could now reach deep into Mediterranean markets, swapping surplus grains and crafted wares for luxury goods once reserved only for chieftains. Roman commercial law and banking practices gave merchants confidence and facilitated credit and long-range contracts. Agriculture itself changed knot by knot. The Roman villa system, powered by slaves or hired hands, introduced bigger farms focused on surplus crops and market sales. Fields expanded, new fruits and grains arrived, and livestock improved through careful breeding. Where families once scraped by on what they could raise, farmers now found themselves growing for distant cities, generating real wealth that reshaped country life. Manufacturing also grew by leaps and bounds. Pottery workshops turned out vast quantities of wares, dishes and amphoras inspired by Roman fashion, but decorated with uniquely Celtic motifs. Metal workers traded war gear for tools and jewelry in styles suited for city life, blending Roman taste with the precision and artistry honed in centuries on the battlefield. Roman roads became the arteries of this new world. Built to last, cutting across valleys, rivers, and forests, they made movement and control far easier. Goods, soldiers, news, and ideas could now race from town to town. Even the most remote corner was only days from the pulse of imperial life. These routes weren't only for merchants, they were power itself, allowing the empire to move legions wherever disturbance threatened. Education was a ticket to the future. New schools and city centers taught Latin alongside old tribal tongues, filling public offices and businesses with a generation that could move through both worlds. By the early 2nd century, young men who grew up with Celtic stories also mastered Roman law, military science, and administration. They became invaluable to the empire, liaisons with local knowledge and imperial ambition. As integration deepened, Celtic influence worked its way back into the empire, not just as soldiers and officials, but as cultural shapers. Roman armies depended on the meaty strength and tall frames of Gallic infantry, renowned throughout the empire for their courage and fighting ability. These men, hardened by centuries of local warfare and farm life, now donned Roman armor, marched under Roman eagles, and brought renown to legions from the Rhine to the Danube and beyond. Celtic cavalry, in particular, became legends in their own time, famous for their long swords and vivid shields. The Aela Gallerum, units filled by the Treveri, Remi, and others, served with distinction everywhere Rome faced tough resistance, from the wilds of Britain and the German forests to the deserts near the Danube. Tributes to their valor survive in stone throughout the empire, recording battle honors for units that never lost their roots, even as they served under Roman banners. By the time of Emperor Trajan, the transformation was complete. Men of Gallic birth made up nearly a third of all centurions in some frontier legions. What began as the conquest of a proud, independent people ended with their sons commanding Roman armies, shaping law and policy, and spreading Celtic influence to the furthest edges of the known world. A testament not only to Roman power, but to the adaptability, resilience, and enduring spirit of the Gauls themselves. Many of these officers started out as ordinary soldiers and support units, but through their skills and determination, they rose through the ranks. Their ability to maintain ties with their local communities not only allowed them to recruit fresh talent, but also strengthened Roman relations in those regions. The First Legion stationed at Bonn is a prime example of how these local connections boosted Roman military power. Originally comprised of Germanic recruits, the Legion increasingly attracted GIC volunteers, whose understanding of the region and cultural background made the unit more effective in complex frontier operations. The Legion's remarkable run of success in campaigns across Dacia, Mesopotamia, and Germania was a testament to how dependable and effective GIC soldiers could be in tough military environments. Their bearer carried a standard marked by symbols rooted in Celtic spirituality, a visual blend of Celtic and Roman military traditions unique to these forces. It wasn't just in battle that the JAC made their mark. Their legacy in military engineering stood out thanks to the exceptional skills of Celtic craftsmen, honed over generations of working with metal and building fortifications. During Trajan's campaigns in Dean, JAC engineers built siege weapons that surpassed old Roman designs by introducing counterweight mechanisms, boosting both the power and precision of catapults and ballistae. These upgrades, born from combining Celtic technical know-how with Roman ingenuity, gave Roman commanders a clear edge in siege warfare and showed how cultural fusion could advance military technology. Gaul's economic boom in the High Empire years was powered by seamless cooperation between Celtic farming wisdom and Roman business systems. The rich farmlands of the GIC regions, managed with improved Roman techniques and linked to Mediterranean markets by new roads and canals, produced abundant crops that drove urban growth and sustained exports to other parts of the empire. The grain from the Send and Lear valleys fed the armies on the Rhine and helped keep Rome's food stores full. At the same time, GIC livestock supplied meat, hides, and wool for buyers throughout the western provinces. During this era, GIC farmers adapted Roman methods to local needs, blending traditional Celtic knowledge with Mediterranean practices. Roman settlers introduced the heavy plough, but GIC smiths modified it to tackle Gaul's tough clay soils, opening up new farmland and raising crop yields. Crop rotation in these territories was another product of smart integration, merging Roman soil management strategies with Celtic insight into regional climate, resulting in higher productivity and healthy soil for years to come. Livestock breeding programs in the GI provinces produced animals that outperformed those from the Mediterranean in size, stamina, and hardiness. Celtic-bred horses, improved through techniques gained from Roman agricultural experts, became prized as cavalry mounts and for everyday transport across the empire. Cattle herds in central Gaul not only met demand for meat and milk, but their hides supplied the leather Roman soldiers and merchants needed. Meanwhile, the manufacturing sector thrived as local skills met Roman business savvy. Potters in southern Gaul, especially at Lagranenki, turned out terracotta pottery, red-glazed wares adorned with creative blends of Roman and Celtic motifs, which became favourites across the empire. Such workshops, employing hundreds of skilled artisans and producing vast numbers of pieces each year, displayed the newfound industrial strength of Romanized Gaul. Metalworking, long a Celtic specialty for weapons and jewelry, was redirected to suit Roman needs while keeping its renowned quality. In Lugdunum, bronze shops manufactured everything from military hardware to household goods and decorative items, each stamped with marks that identified their GIC origin. Ironworks that arose in Gaul's eastern forests supplied Roman legions and civilian markets, while pioneering advanced steelmaking processes, improving on earlier Roman techniques. Textile production built on the sheep-raising customs of Celtic clans, but took full advantage of Roman spinning and weaving methods. Workshops across Gaul produced woolens celebrated for their durability and quality, so much so that cloth from the region became highly valued in Rome itself. Linen, too, became a major export as flax fields in northern Gaul supported an industry that provided countless jobs and bound GIC communities to Mediterranean consumers. Trade networks crisscrossed the continent, connecting GIC producers with nearly every region of the Roman world. GIC merchants, building on both Celtic trading habits and Roman commercial rules, ran businesses stretching from Britain to North Africa and beyond. These networks, backed by Roman laws and currency, fueled urban growth and cultural life across Gaul. Merchant families in vibrant cities like Lugdunum and Montiacum largely managed the flow of goods up and down the Rhine. Their sturdy river barges, crafted by shipwrights who merged Celtic woodworking and Roman engineering, outperformed Mediterranean vessels and navigated challenging river routes, helping supply the Roman army with everything it needed on the frontier. The Atlantic faced no boundaries for these merchants. Ports like Burdigala sent out ships loaded with GIC wine, pottery, and other manufactured goods, returning with British tin, Spanish silver, and exotic items from Africa. Such trade activities, safeguarded by Roman protections, generated wealth that brought prosperity even to regions far from the coast. The growing influence of prominent Grecian figures in Roman politics showed how effectively Romanization worked and how far Grecian talent could reach when recognized by Rome's top administrators. One notable example, Marcus Valerius Iaticus, was born in Vienne to a distinguished Grecian family. Rising to the position of consul under Caligula, he became one of the most powerful and affluent men in the empire. His story, marked by military prowess and vast private enterprise, showed the incredible opportunities open to ambitious Gauls who could thrive in the Roman system without losing touch with their roots. GC writers played a pivotal part in shaping Roman literary and cultural life, with figures like Pomponius Mela leading the way. As a geographer deeply familiar with GIC lands and customs, his influential texts gave Roman readers a nuanced view of Celtic society beyond the usual military or administrative reports. His detailed descriptions and sophisticated analysis not only shed light on Celtic life, but also revealed the high level of learning among Gauls who adopted and excelled in Roman literature. The flourishing of rhetorical schools in GIC cities during the 2nd century CE produced a generation of orators whose talents rivaled those in Rome and Athens. These academies were often staffed by Gauls who had refined their skills in Rome or Athens, and then returned home to combine Roman rhetorical principles with centuries-old Celtic oral traditions. Graduates from these schools went on to thrive in law, politics, and administration, thanks to their exceptional command of speech and argument. GBC thinkers also made lasting philosophical contributions by blending Celtic wisdom with Roman and Greek thought. Even though the political and judicial role of Druids was officially ended, they continued as guardians of Celtic intellectual traditions, adapting and merging their teachings with Roman spiritual and philosophical ideas. Their legacy shaped how educated Gauls approached big questions about ethics, nature, and belief. The creation of Gallo-Roman culture stands as a remarkable example of ancient cultural blending, keeping core aspects of Celtic identity alive within the larger framework of Roman civilization. Religious traditions in the region, for instance, merged Celtic deities and rituals with Roman theology and temple architecture, producing spiritual practices and sacred spaces that appealed to both groups. The resulting temples fused Roman construction with Celtic spatial ideas, serving as gathering places for diverse communities. Artistic output in GIC communities during Roman times reflected this fusion as well. Public buildings and city spaces featured sculptural programs that blended Celtic symbols with Roman artistic practices, celebrating imperial power alongside local heritage. Mosaics in wealthy Gallo-Roman homes intertwined Roman geometric patterns with natural imagery inspired by Celtic motifs, offering a visual story of this unique societal mix. Even domestic architecture evolved, as grand rural villas incorporated Roman comforts, like hypocaust heating and baths, while retaining layouts that suited Celtic family customs. Urban planning in GIC cities masterfully combined Roman administrative efficiency with community-oriented Celtic practices. Forums anchored these towns, hosting marketplaces, courts, and social events, while still making room for Celtic celebrations and gatherings. Residential districts reflected the diversity of inhabitants, bringing together Roman settlers and Romanized Gauls in neighborhoods shaped by cultural integration. Celebrations and festivals that took root in GIC communities were vibrant expressions of this cultural marriage. Harvest time festivals such as the Luni celebrations blended Roman Thanksgiving customs with Celtic feasts and games, uniting people in traditions that reinforced both empire-wide loyalty and local pride. Patronized by GIC elites and drawing crowds from all walks of life, these events became hallmarks of a society where Celtic and Roman customs thrived side by side. Yet the harmony that characterized Gallo-Roman society began to unravel in the 3rd century CE as internal and external pressures mounted. The GIC provinces, vital both strategically and economically, were hit hard by the larger crisis engulfing the Roman Empire. On the Rhine frontier, growing threats from Germanic confederations like the Alemanni posed new dangers. These adversaries were far more organized than earlier tribal groups, borrowing Roman tactics and structure to field formidable infantry and cavalry forces. In 213 CE, the Alemanni launched their first major incursion into GIC territory. Roughly 20,000 warriors crossed the Rhine near Magiarcum, overwhelming Roman border garrisons depleted by troop reassignments elsewhere. Using swift mobile raids to avoid Roman fortifications, they ravaged the Vosges region, seizing goods and captives before withdrawing safely across the border. This marked the beginning of a new era of instability, as GIC communities, once beneficiaries of Roman prosperity and cultural fusion, now faced mounting threats to their way of life from both within and beyond the empire. Reuniting Gaul with the Roman Empire after the fall of the GIC Empire was no simple feat. Deep administrative changes were put in place to cope with the transformation that had taken place during Gaul's time outside imperial control. Sweeping reforms under Diocletian redrew the map, with new provincial borders better reflecting the realities that had emerged from years of turmoil and change. The vast prefecture of Gaul became one of the empire's four main divisions, stretching from Britain all the way to Spain and comprising over 100 provinces. Alongside these government reforms, the military was overhauled to address new kinds of threats, replacing older rigid defences with greater agility. Limitanae, the frontier troops stationed in fortified posts along the Rhine, were now backed up by mobile armies called the comitances, forces that could rush to danger points anywhere in the region at a moment's notice. This military investment was immense, with about 150,000 soldiers spread throughout GIC territories, marking the largest defensive force Rome had ever assigned to the region. An intensive program of fortification in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries showed Gaul's enduring importance to the empire's security. New coastal defences, the Saxon shore forts protected against Germanic raiders from the north. Engineered with the latest design, these forts bristled with sturdy walls, jutting towers, and complex gatehouses to withstand protracted assaults. Restoring Roman rule brought not just peace, but a robust economic revival. GIC society proved remarkably resilient, as the government invested heavily in rebuilding roads, bridges, and towns, while strong border defences allowed farming and trade to recover quickly. Markets reopened, connecting local producers once again with buyers across the empire, and sending goods along networks that delivered employment to merchants, artisans, and transporters alike. At the same time, the Frankish Confederation was taking shape along the Lower Rhine, representing an entirely new kind of Germanic kingdom, drawing from both their tribal heritage and new knowledge gained through contact with Rome. Communities like the Salian Franks, settled in areas now part of Belgium and the Netherlands, began adopting innovative farming and trading practices, supporting larger populations than ever before among the Germanic peoples. Their armies, now made up of full-time warriors equipped with uniform weapons and trained in tight formations, posed far greater threats than the old raiding bands. Frankish incursions into GIC lands in the late 3rd century were carefully coordinated and demonstrated skillful tactics. When, in 286 CE, 15,000 disciplined Frankish fighters crossed near Cologne, they found Roman defenders weakened by recent turmoil. The Franks advanced easily, taking lands in Gallia Belgica with little resistance. The arrival of Germanic settlers brought a wave of change to Gaul, transforming its population and daily life. New techniques in farming, traditional crafts, and distinct customs flowed in alongside the Franks, blending bit by bit with the legacy of Gallo-Roman culture and laying the groundwork for the coming medieval era. The Roman reaction to this expansion balanced force and diplomacy, reflecting a changing vision of imperial boundaries and authority. New treaties or fodera gave Frankish groups official status as Roman allies in return for loyalty and military aid. While this eased immediate pressures on the frontier, it also created semi-independent Germanic enclaves inside the empire, communities that would later challenge Roman rule from within. An altogether different upheaval took hold in rural Gaul at this time as well. Economic stresses and harsh conditions inspired the rise of the Bagaudae, peasant rebels who rallied under charismatic figures such as Amandus and Alienus. Their ranks swelled with evicted farmers, runaway slaves, and disillusioned soldiers, all seeking relief from a society that had failed them. Organizing guerrilla resistance from remote forests and mountain hideouts, the Bagaudae threatened stability, forcing Rome to divide its resources between suppressing these insurgents and defending the borders. The campaigns led by Maximian and his officers in 286 CE succeeded in rooting out the strongholds of the rebels, but Roman leaders recognized that military might alone wouldn't keep the peace. After crushing resistance, they offered clemency to those who surrendered and enacted economic measures to alleviate rural hardship, showing that Roman administrators had learned hard lessons about winning loyalty through both strength and reform. At the same time, the spiritual fabric of society was shifting. Christianity made extraordinary gains across GIC lands, giving rise to new forms of social community and identity that rivaled and eventually replaced ancient Roman and Celtic cults. The martyrdom of Saint Denis in Lutetia in 250 CE became a rallying symbol for these emerging Christian circles, which grew rapidly as people sought solace and hope and faith amid years of uncertainty. Constantine's reforms in the early 4th century cemented a new political order in Gaul, introducing systems and laws that would outlast the empire itself. Establishing Trier as an imperial capital brought new attention and investment to GIC territories, creating precedents for regional government that would echo into medieval Europe. Local traditions melded with Roman legal frameworks to form institutions uniquely suited to Gaul's people. Still, despite all these efforts, the Rhine frontier remained a battleground. Invasions by the Alemanni in 356 and 357 CE, though turned back by Julian, highlighted just how deeply the old problems persisted. Germanic tribes gathered strength each year and updated their tactics, while Rome's overstretched armies struggled to respond effectively across several fronts. As the 5th century dawned, the gradual erosion of Roman power in Gaul accelerated. A succession of Germanic kingdoms began to emerge where Roman provinces once stood. The Frankish kingdom, founded by Clovis in 481 CE, marked the true end of any independent GIC identity. With the rise of the Merovingian dynasty, political power in Gaul took a new form, shaped by Germanic customs yet still built on the bones of Roman administration. The Frankish conquest of Roman Gaul combined ruthless warfare with astute negotiation, reflecting Clovis's deep understanding of both sides. His victory at Soissons in 486 CE, where about 15,000 Frankish warriors crushed Syagrius's last Roman defenders, featured disciplined ranks armed with signature throwing axes, spears, and forged swords. Coordinated infantry charges, supported by swift cavalry, broke the line of Roman defense, signaling the end of the era. In the aftermath, Clovis's policies were both decisive and transformative. Roman commanders were executed, their troops absorbed into Frankish ranks, erasing the last threads of institutional continuity with Rome. The old world of Gallo-Roman civilization, once respected for its learning, its architecture, its social order, finally faded, replaced by a kingdom that set the course for the future of medieval France and much of Western Europe. As the Franks expanded their control across Gaul in the late 5th and early 6th centuries, the remnants of Roman administrative order quickly unraveled. Official records that once kept Roman legal and tax systems running were either destroyed or seized by Frankish rulers, who often lacked the training to keep these complex systems alive. Great libraries in former Roman cities, repositories of legal codes and classical learning, were abandoned, repurposed, or simply left to decay, cutting off the intellectual lifelines that had held Gallo-Roman culture together for centuries. The arrival of Frankish power brought massive change to the social landscape. Old Gallo-Roman elites, who had managed to survive under earlier Germanic regimes, found themselves dispossessed as Clovis and his warriors swept through Aquitaine and other regions, stripping ancient senatorial families of their lands and privileges. Newly minted Frankish landowners, elevated from warbands loyal to Clovis, took possession of estates, but often lacked both the farming experience and trade contacts that had kept the local economy flourishing under Roman rule. One of the most profound shifts came through the legal system. Around 510 CE, Clovis initiated the codification of Salic law, a set of Germanic customs that broke sharply from established Roman jurisprudence. Gone were the intricate property hearings and written contracts. In their place were systems of collective responsibility, fines paid as compensation for wrongs, and legal distinctions based on ethnicity. Trials now often hinged on sworn oaths, trial by ordeal, and the verdicts of local assemblies dominated by Frankish nobles. Such upheaval threw the economy into disorder. The network of Mediterranean trade that once linked Gaul to the wider Roman world began to fall apart, as Frankish governance simply could not guarantee either the stability or legal security such commerce demanded. Pottery, metal goods and textile workshops that had long fueled exports shrank or shut down, shifting their focus to the much smaller local markets. Thousands of skilled jobs vanished, eroding the wealth and diversity of Gallo-Roman cities. Urban life itself withered. Forums that once buzzed with activity became deserted or repurposed as Frankish rulers established their courts and power bases in rural estates, reflecting their own tradition of power, far removed from the public urban life of Rome. Public buildings, now without resources or interested patrons, crumbled into neglect. Demographically and culturally, Gaul changed quickly. Not only did new waves of Germanic settlers arrive, but the mix of populations led to gradual assimilation. Archaeology tells the story. Cemeteries from this period show a fading of Roman burial customs, with grave goods reflecting Germanic tastes, distinct jewelry, weaponry, and household items, taking the place of Roman treasures. It's clear that change reached deep into daily life and values, not just official institutions. Religion became a double-edged force in this transition. Christianity, especially after Clovis's strategic baptism as a Catholic around 496 CE, became central to forging a single kingdom from both Roman and Germanic peoples. That ceremony, led by Bishop Remigius at Reims, and attended by Frankish warriors as well as Gallo-Roman nobles, established the Catholic Church as an authority that could unify the region's diverse populations. Clergy, often still drawn from the old Roman upper classes, used their literacy and organizational skills to preserve fragments of Roman order and maintain some continuity. Bishops wielded influence that sometimes exceeded even secular Frankish officials, becoming the new power brokers in the changing landscape. At the same time, the Christianization of Gaul brought harsh suppression of older pagan practices. Ancient temples, groves, and sites sacred first to the Celts and later to Gallo-Roman tradition were razed or repurposed for Christian worship. The once resilient Druids who had preserved Celtic knowledge through generations found themselves condemned, their wisdom branded as superstition or worse. Despite these losses, the dawn of the monastic movement offered a fragile bridge to the past. Monasteries, like those founded by Saint Columbanus and Saint Eligius, became new centers for scholarship and culture, where monks preserved and copied surviving classical works alongside Christian scripture. These scriptoriums, while limited in reach, saved bits of ancient learning and fostered new forms of art that wove together Roman, Germanic, and Christian influences. Education underwent a dramatic change as well. With the decline of secular Roman schools, Christian teaching dominated, with curricula focused on Latin grammar and religious doctrine. Subjects like history, philosophy, and rhetoric, once the pride of Gallo-Roman learning, slipped into neglect. Rhetorical schools closed their doors or transformed into institutions for church training, cutting off the pathways that once led Roman youth into law, governance, and literary life. Linguistic transformation was equally dramatic, as Frankish chieftains and Christian clergy promoted Latin and later Germanic dialects for official business and worship. The Celtic languages hanging on in rural or lower-class communities faced a new onslaught. The once vibrant Gaulish tongue vanished, replaced by Latin or Frankish as old communities adapted to new realities. Even the Latin that survived in Gaulian society began to change, absorbing Germanic words related to war and law, blending with surviving Celtic sounds and phrases, and slowly evolving into the earliest forms of Old French. Official Latin, written by clerics and legal scribes now far removed from classical education, steadily moved away from its ancient roots, reflecting the spoken language of the age and pushing the region further from its Gallo-Roman origins. Archaeological discoveries across post-Roman Gaul reveal the slow and complex blending and disappearance of Celtic life after centuries of political and social upheaval. Even as Roman order faded and Frankish power took hold, the deep roots of Celtic culture remained visible, but often in subtle or altered forms. In the world of decorative arts, for instance, the distinct styles developed by Celtic metalworkers continued to leave their mark on Frankish craftsmanship. Germanic artisans, newly dominant in the region, adopted and adapted Celtic patterns into their own designs, creating a visual evidence of cultural fusion, even as local traditions faded. Pottery, however, tells a different story. Throughout Roman times, different regions in Gaul held on to their own pottery shapes and decorations, but as Germanic settlers arrived and their populations grew, these regional lines were erased. New ceramic styles and techniques quickly took hold, replacing old methods as communities intermingled and tastes changed. Deep changes transformed life on the land as well. For generations, Celtic and later Gallo-Roman farmers had relied on a centralized system of villas. Large estates worked mostly by slaves or tenant labor, but now, as Germanic customs spread, sprawling estates broke apart. Agriculture became centered around smaller, scattered family farms, each worked by free peasants rather than overseers and laborers. The old Roman field systems, developed for estate farming, were either abandoned or drastically changed to fit the new realities of Germanic-style agriculture, a pattern better suited to local environments and new ideas about land ownership. This transformation was felt deeply in the crafts and trades that had once defined Celtic ingenuity. Skills and knowledge about metalwork, pottery, and textiles had long been preserved within guilds and through carefully watched apprenticeships. But as the social order was torn up, and entire communities shifted or vanished, these training systems were broken. Germanic newcomers set up their own workshops, and over time, much specialized knowledge, painstakingly passed down through generations, simply disappeared. The rich, sophisticated manufacturing talents of the old Celtic world faded into memory as new production centers took their place. An even greater break came in the spiritual life of Gaul. In late Roman times, religious practice in the region had become a mixture of old Celtic gods, imported Roman beliefs and local rituals, leading to a dynamic, shared spiritual landscape. But Christian authorities now pushed for absolute religious unity. Syncretic traditions, mixing the ancient with the new, were forbidden. Any trace of pre-Christian or pagan faith was labeled as heresy or demon worship, often punished harshly. Sacred sites long venerated in Celtic religion, holy trees, springs, stone circles, were either desecrated or overtaken by Christian buildings. The gods and goddesses of the Gauls, who once commanded both fear and reverence, faded quickly from living memory. As for the artistic tradition, what once flourished in Gallo-Roman towns began to vanish. The vibrant sculptures once found in temples and public buildings were left to decay or destroyed outright, as Frankish rulers had little interest in the grand art of the past. Mosaic workshops, once in demand among the wealthy, disappeared as Germanic tastes favored new forms of interior decoration, and fewer people could afford such luxuries anyway. It's striking to realize that the powerful history and legends of the Gauls would only become important for French national identity much later, and not through any living continuity. The real Celtic civilization of ancient Gaul was by the year 800 all but extinct. The arts, languages, and beliefs that once defined this culture were swept away through waves of Romanization, Christian conversion, and Germanic settlement. What remains for us to study are the artifacts buried in the earth, pottery shards, metalwork, abandoned foundations, clues to a vibrant world that had been almost completely absorbed into the larger current of European history. Yet, elements of the past continued to shape what was coming. The Frankish kingdom that arose from the ashes of Roman Gaul did keep traces of the old Roman way, chiefly in how they organized land, taxes, and law. But they combined these with Germanic and Celtic solutions. The rise of feudalism, a social network built on loyalty and personal bonds, was rooted in the traditions of all three cultures. Old Celtic systems of clientage, Roman discipline and administration, and Germanic customs of oath-taking and direct service. Even farming and estate management became a hybrid, combining Roman estate habits with the smaller farm model of the Germanic settlers, while still holding on to practical aspects of Celtic rural life. These deep fusions showed up most dramatically in legal traditions. The Frankish codes written in the 6th and 7th centuries kept some Roman rules about property and contracts, even as they relied on older Germanic customs for criminal matters. Over time, this blend became a foundation for the medieval law that would shape Europe for centuries. The final memory of the true Gauls of their language, rituals, and unique worldview lingered only in traces. By the rise of the Carolingian Empire, the Celtic past had been almost completely overlaid by new languages, religions, and power structures. The Gauls survived only in romantic echoes and archaeological sites, their living civilization reshaped by centuries of foreign rule and adaptation. The transformation that began with Caesar's conquest and reached its peak under Charlemagne was nothing short of complete. The Gauls who once resisted Rome, who built hill forts and crafted beautiful goldwork, now lived on only through the artifacts and mysteries discovered by modern scholars, a culture absorbed, transformed, and ultimately reborn in the flowering of medieval Europe.